State Hillary Clinton heads to Mexico today, a day after the Obama administration announced it would send more money, technology, and manpower to secure the United States-Mexico border and bolster the Mexican government's anti-drug operation. President Obama laid out the new plan at his press conference on Tuesday night.
We are sending millions of dollars in additional equipment to provide more effective surveillance. We are providing hundreds of additional personnel that can help control the border, deal with customs issues. We are coordinating very effectively with the Mexican government and President Calderon, who has taken on an extraordinarily difficult task of dealing with these drug cartels that have gotten completely out of hand. And so the steps that we've taken are designed to make sure that the border communities in the United States are protected and you're not seeing a spillover of violence, and that we are helping the Mexican government deal with a very challenging situation. We've got to also take some steps, even as he is doing more to deal with the drug cartels sending drugs into the United States. We need to do more to make sure that illegal guns and cash aren't flowing back to these cartels. That's part of what's financing their operations. That's part of what's arming them. That's what makes them so dangerous.
Earlier Tuesday,
I share the anger and frustration of the American.
Earlier Tuesday, Homeland Security Chief Janet Napolitano said the administration was, quote, still considering and looking at deploying the National Guard at the border. She added she would meet with Texas Governor Rick Perry to discuss sending 1,000 National Guard troops to the border. Secretary of State Clinton's visit to Mexico marks the start of several high-level meetings between Mexico and the United States. Homeland Security Secretary Napolitano and Attorney General Eric Holder are scheduled to meet with Mexican officials in early April before President Obama's visit just ahead of the Summit of the Americas. Mexican authorities say over 6,000 people were killed in drug-related violence last year, and some American analysts have warned Mexico could become a, quote, failed state. For some analysis from the U.S.-Mexico border, I'm joined now on the telephone from El Paso, Texas, by independent journalist and author John Gibler. His book, Mexico Unconquered, Chronicles of Power and Revolt, came out earlier this year. John, welcome to Democracy Now! The reaction on the border to the announcement yesterday and what you see happening there.
Good morning, Amy. Thank you very much. So the reaction on the El Paso side is one of mild relief. There is a good deal of people kind of scared about this idea of spillover violence. And the reaction on the Juarez side of the border that I've been able to judge so far is one of skeptical, well, we'll see. There's a lot of energy, kind of skeptical of the Obama administration. They've not seen a lot of real promise and initiative from the U.S. government on the drug war. And one of the reasons there is, first of all, I think the United States government has always liked to export the perception of chaos and violence to other countries like Colombia and now Mexico. So while the drug violence in Mexico is very real, at least the Mexican people are sufficiently outraged to demand change. Over the last few years, as the violence has exploded every 2nd or 3rd of January, the main headline of Mexico's national dailies is the number of people that has been executed the year before. In 2007, that number is about 3,000. As you mentioned, in 2008, it was about 6,000 people. Well, where is the corresponding count in the United States? Here, drug executions and violence between dealers who are disputing and battling over turf are daily occurrences across the country. But the violence seems to have been ghettoized. There is no national political consciousness in the mainstream media or in the government about how that violence stems itself from the drug war. So now you have the mainstream media, the president coming along and warning us of spillover violence from Mexico. I think that expresses the kind of racist logic of the drug war, where first drug violence is seen as spilling over from another country instead of as something that is always transnational and related to the drug trade. And second, you know, the absence of the corresponding outrage for the drug violence that plagues most U.S. cities. And the response there from the government seems to always be build more prisons and incarcerate more people of color.
And this issue of Mexico as a failed state?
I think there, again, it's not so much the state is failing rather uncomfortable facts about its true nature are exposed, and that has to do with the the fact that the drug cartels, and for decades now, have so deeply infiltrated pretty much every institution in the state. So when the drug cartels enter into this extreme, bloody, very real war over territory, over trafficking routes, that war takes place within the structure of the state itself. That is, the different people in the judicial branch of government, the executive branch of government, the highest levels of the federal anti-drug forces, like those offices in the Federal Attorney General's office, where Noe Ramirez Mandujano, the ex-anti-drug czar, was recently found taking $450,000 in bribes from the Sinaloa cartel. Well, people start to fall internally to the state as well, is one of the kind of level casualties of that violence between rival cartels. But here as well, this should be a moment to pause and reflect and look back at the United States as well, because, again, I think the U.S. always tries to export this perception of chaos, export the perception of corruption. And it's as if once the drugs cross the border, they somehow teleport to their end users and are distributed across this vast nation without the aid of an incredible distribution network, highly organized, that will always need to rely on local fixers, and local fixers involved in every level of government. Again, here I think the Mexican people might have something to teach us in the fact that their outrage at the level of corruption and violence pushes society to act more, whereas here there's just this tendency to export all of this chaos and violence to other countries and not look at how, or to find the places where the drug cartels have also infiltrated the state here in the U.S.
John Gibler, I want to thank you for being with us, independent journalist and author. His book is Mexico Unconquered, speaking to us from near the border in El Paso, Texas. As we turn now to a new report from Amnesty International lambasting the state of the immigrant detention system in this country. 400,000 people arrested by immigration officials each year, some of them U.S. citizens. On average, over 30,000 people are in immigrant detention facilities. That's 3 times the number of immigrants who were in custody a decade ago. The report's called Jailed Without Justice. It says tens of thousands languish in immigration prisons and deplorable conditions without receiving a hearing to determine whether their detention is warranted. Those detained include lawful permanent residents, undocumented immigrants, asylum seekers, survivors of torture and human trafficking. At least 74 people have died in immigration custody in the past 5 years, says the report. Well, I'm joined now in the firehouse by Rosa Clemente. You may know her as the former Green vice presidential candidate. She ran with Cynthia McKinney. She's now the Immigrant Rights Campaign Director for Amnesty International USA. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thanks for having me, Amy.
In just a few minutes, we're going to be speaking with Independent Senator Bernie Sanders. But right now, the results of this report, as we see the increasing militarization of the border and the focus of Washington on the Mexican-U.S. border.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the report is about immigrants in detention. So obviously our 5 most popular ethnic groups are Mexicanos, Guatemalans, Salvadorans, Chinese, and Philippine people. But I'm very concerned about this potential federalizing of the border because we already see kind of the immigration backlash that has been happening against particularly Latino immigrants, but also we haven't seen a dialogue or debate around comprehensive immigration reform and the system. So we're very concerned right now, but as it pertains to the report and the statistics that you put out, one of the main things is that even when you're detained, you are subject to human rights, and human rights are being violated within a lot of these ICE detention centers, but also the local and state prisons that contract to have detainees in their prisons.
Are immigration prisons mainly private?
Well, what we're seeing actually, excuse me, I'm sorry. That right now we see that there's 67% of immigrants in detention are within state and county criminal jails, and about, I think, 50% of those are privatized. And the interesting thing is that the company that has this contract is CCA, Corporations Corrections of America. Corrections Corporation of America, formerly known as Sodexo, kind of the boogie monster that in the 90s the movement around the prison industrial complex was fighting.
What are the recommendations of your report?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main recommendations right now is that Department of Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, she needs to put out a strong message out there that first the ICE standards that are there must be enforced. Also that we have to think about alternatives to detention, right? There are programs where people can call in, say where they're at. We're not keen with the ankle monitoring because that in itself is a violation of your humanity in your body, but there are alternatives to detention. And also, I mean, we have to recommend that people get access to legal counsel and get access to knowing their rights within detention. And many of these detainees don't have the money and don't have access to legal counsel. So although they're afforded a hearing, many can then languish without due process anywhere from 37 days to we had someone that was in there for 3.5 years before their case was determined.
Well, Rosa Clemente, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Rosa Clemente, Immigrant Rights Campaign Director for Amnesty International.